Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, Making Communities Livable for All People, with our special guest, AARP. And this is part of Project for Public Spaces webinar series. Today, we're very excited to present our guests, Danielle Arigoni, Director of Livable Communities, AARP, and Mike Watson, Senior Advisor at Livable Communities team, also AARP, and myself, Juliet Kahn, Director of Events at Project for Public Spaces, who will help facilitate at the end of the webinar. We want to thank AARP for joining us. We're excited to have them, and we know you all are eager to hear about the challenge that they're going to be presenting today. And we also want to thank AARP, who's been a sponsor of Walk Bike Places, which is from last year in 2020 when we went online, but also for our upcoming conference taking place this June. So we look forward to seeing you all there. So Danielle and Mike, if you want to turn on your cameras, and I'm going to pass it over to both of you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Juliet. And thanks to Project for Public Spaces for carving out this time for us today, for inviting us to be a part of this webinar series. I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm Danielle Arigoni, Director of Livable Communities at AARP.
And I'm Mike Watson. I'm a Senior Advisor for Livable Communities at AARP.
And we are here to kind of give an overview of the kinds of ways and supports that we offer to you as you work in your communities all across the country and the world, it looks like, looking at the chat here, in helping to make places better for people of all ages. We do have a slide deck, so we'll get that started. And as we kick off that slide deck, I want to get your wheel spinning about your understanding of where we stand from a demographic standpoint here in the US specifically. So we have a poll for you that we're going to get started here. And the question is, what year do you think the US will reach the demographic tipping point of having more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18? So go ahead and put in your answers. Your choices are 2025, in other words, 4 years from now, 2034, 2041, or 2045. I will say, while you're contemplating and logging your votes, this tipping point is the first time that this will have happened in our country's history. So when we say that a change is coming, we certainly mean that that's the case from a demographic standpoint. And we'll get into why that's so important and what that means for you. So if you haven't yet cast your vote, please do. I think the results will come up momentarily here. All right, so about a little over a third think 2025, pretty soon. Almost half guessed 2034, and far fewer guessed further out than that. Good news is you're all, the majority of you are heading in the right direction. It's coming fast. It is expected to occur in 2034. So those of you who felt that this might be coming in 2025, that says to me that you are pretty compelled to act. And in fact, it may be exactly that case in your own locality that by 2025, you will have more older adults than children. Next slide, please. But as a country, we're actually approaching that day in 2034. This is a report from the US Census, which was subsequently updated, moving that date even closer. We're actually in the middle of a really rapid change and period of growth in the number of older adults. In fact, the 65 and older population grew by over a third just the last decade alone. And as I mentioned, these trends are all across the country, but accelerating in some parts of the country, particularly rural places that already have reached that point. Next slide, please. So it causes us to ask the question in AARP, if we know this is the future we're heading towards, are we creating places that are going to allow for 65 plus, 50 plus people of all ages to thrive? And I think that it's reasonable to say that we're probably not. In fact, we're not creating places that work very well for older adults now. And likely we need to make some changes in order to be ready for that demographic future. And we know that for a few different reasons. One, when you look at housing, for example, we are aware that the housing stock does not match who we are as a population today. Today, we're a country where about half of our households are 1 or 2 person households. And yet 85% of our housing stock is 2, 3, 4 or more bedrooms. We see that the rent burden on older adults, particularly older renters, is increasing. And in its most extreme cases, that is resulting in increases of older adults who are homeless. So the affordability question is certainly not indicative of a market that is well serving older adults, particularly those on fixed incomes. We know that there's a shortage of housing that offers accessibility features, simple things like zero entry steps or wider doorways. You may not need it now, but you may need it before you know it, whether it's a ski accident or maybe you're pushing a baby stroller. The reality is that we need more housing that is better for people of all ages and all abilities. And right now, less than 1% of US homes have those kinds of features in them. When you think about public spaces, which is, I think, something that we all care so much about, particularly those of you on the call, there's a real breakdown in the number of older adults who use our public spaces. A RAND report of the largest cities in the US noticed that while older adults make up 20% of the population, they only make up 4% of park users. Likely that's because we're not designing places that appeal to older adults. They don't have the right kind of amenities, design, features that older adults are looking for. Moreover, we know that parks are not well serving people of all races, ethnicities, language, income levels. That in fact, there's a very wide disparity in access to public spaces, with communities of color being underserved by parks. And that has very real effects for all the reasons you might expect, but also it can contribute to environmental conditions that hasten risk for older adults, particularly when there's a lack of green space and heat events are underway. Next slide, please. Similarly, for transportation, when you think about how do older adults get around, the fact is that most older adults outlive their ability to drive by anywhere from 7 to 10 years. And so when that day comes that they no longer drive or choose to no longer drive, what are the options available to them? Well, public transit, hopefully, but we know that public transit right now is in crisis. It was having its difficulties before COVID. It's truly in a crisis state now. When you think about bike and ped infrastructure and safety, we've all seen the increases in fatalities, traffic fatalities involving pedestrians and cyclists in the last decade. Older adults are disproportionately represented among those in the majority of states. And all of these built environment features contribute to, frankly, a situation where people feel isolated if they can't get out, if they aren't able to live with people or live nearby people who they could socialize with. That contributes to prolonged loneliness, prolonged sense of isolation. We've all had a little taste of that, I think, in COVID-19, but it's something that has very real effects for all people, particularly for older adults, where the health effects are equivalent of prolonged isolation. They are equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we know that they also contribute to increased risk of dementia and other mental health issues. Next slide, please. So all told, we're not building places that work very well for older adults, and we need to be. So what is the role of AARP? Well, our goal through the Livable Communities Initiative is to really support local leaders like you all, work directly in communities, to help rethink their housing, transportation, and public space decisions, so that we're creating places not just that work for older adults, but that really work for people of all ages. We do that in a few different ways that I'll walk through, and we'll give special emphasis today on the grants that we offer, which will occupy the second half of our talk today. So next slide, please. The first way in which we support communities is through this framework that we offer. We run a program now for several years called the AARP Network of Age-Friendly States and Communities. And that offers to localities the option to raise their hand to say, we commit to becoming a more age-friendly community or state. It's a voluntary program. It's a 5-year commitment. And what that does is it then encourages the community, inclusive of elected leaders, inclusive of city departments, of volunteers, of a wide variety of stakeholders in the community. It brings them all together to map through a process where they're looking at their housing, their transportation, their public space, but they're also looking at things like community health, social participation. How are we getting information to older adults? By going through what we call these 8 domains of livability. Over 100 million US residents now live in a community that is seeking to become more age-friendly, which is fantastic, as well as 6 states plus US Virgin Islands. If you're curious if your community is an age-friendly community, I encourage you to look that up at our livablemap.aarp.org. And we're going to do a special deep dive on a couple communities that I've spotlighted here in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Some other tools that we offer are more internet-based, information resource tools that can be helpful to you. One of which is our livability index, which I think is a great starting place for assessing what is your community doing well already. This tool aggregates about 60 different data sources and breaks down around 7 categories to say just how livable your community is. It's a great place, again, to figure out what's going well and where there's work to be done. Again, our searchable map here not just lets you, it doesn't let you only find out whether your community is age friendly or working to become age friendly, but it also helps you find grant projects that we've funded across the country. It lets you search in terms of communities that are doing e-bike programs or traffic calming efforts, or what small towns are doing, or even very large towns are doing. All of that is kind of searchable and can be explored through our Livable map. We also have a weekly newsletter that I highly encourage everyone to sign up for. If you text Livable to 50757, that gets you on our list, where we now count about 110,000 local leaders each week who hear from us. We are constantly sort of curating content that we think is going to help you do your job. And that's the best place to find out about new publications, grant announcements, events, not just from us, but from partners, and news that you can use really to help you in your community. All of these things can be found through our aarp.org/livable website. Next slide, please. One of the things that I'm particularly proud of is the number of publications that we offer. And if you know anything about AARP, it's that I think we put out some really useful content, not just for our members, as you may be acquainted with, but for local practitioners. And these publications that I feature here are really all about getting to practitioners and local leaders and getting tools in their hands, in your hands, so that you can use them. So whether you want to do a walk audit in your community to involve people in assessing how safe and comfortable the pedestrian environment is, we've got a tool for you. We actually updated our popular walk audit guide last year with worksheets that you can now print from home, so that people can more easily go out in their community and assess what's working well and what needs to be improved from a pedestrian safety and comfort and accessibility standpoint. When you think about things like placemaking, which I know all of you on the phone are intimately familiar with, we produced a great guide, the pop-up placemaking toolkit with Team Better Block a couple of years ago, that really walks people through how to do a placemaking demonstration in their community. We talk about the process, we talk about some recipes that you can use and why it matters, how it is a mechanism or can be a mechanism to build community support for the kind of change that we all seek. When we think about housing, we've got a lot of great resources, particularly the ABCs of ADUs guide, which I think makes the case for why ADUs fit in communities, why and how they respond to the needs of older adults and people of all ages, as well as much more. So I encourage you to check out all of these publications. They're all available for free via download or in print. And we can send out multiple copies if you need to work in a community with a community and think that this information will be helpful to you. Next slide, please. So with this, I'm really excited to turn the stage over to my colleague, Mike Watson, who's going to talk a little bit about our grant program and how that can help you help catalyze change in your community.
Thanks, Danielle, and thanks everybody for joining today. Danielle just gave a great overview of AARP's kind of focus and work on livable communities and resources that we have. And one of the things we want to do today is kind of spotlight one of those, which is the AARP Community Challenge Grant. So before we kind of jump more into the program, we have another poll question that we'd like to have everybody weigh in on. So if we can go ahead and put that up, then we'll, so the poll is around the Community Challenge Grant. So rural communities have received what % of the total AARP Community Challenge grants from 2017 to 2020? First option is 10%, next is 25%, next is 33%, and next is 40%. Just go ahead and drop your answer in there. And if you have any other thoughts, feel free to drop them in the chat too. And it looks like the majority of you think it's 33%, about 34% of you think that, about 30% of you think it's 25%. So we'll get to the answer in a couple slides. So we'll kind of hold and reveal that. If we can go to the next slide. So the AARP Community Challenge is really a program that's built to kind of jumpstart change. And Danielle talked a little bit about the work that AARP does to make communities more livable for all. The challenge is a program to really kind of create a tangible demonstration of that. And again, what we want to do is provide infusions of funding to jumpstart progress for longer term change. And the story of the challenge actually is something that came from the community and came from AARP state offices. I'll just flag if folks are listening today and you're not connected with your AARP state office, you can find their contact information on the AARP website at states.aarp.org. I encourage you to reach out to them because they come up with great ideas like this program. This started in 2 state offices where states were hearing from community organizations that just having a little bit of funding to infuse and jumpstart progress would really help. So states tested it working with community partners and it went really great. And in 2017, AARP kind of took that small scale pilot in 2 state offices and wanted to take it nationwide to kind of, again, scale the impact that we had seen in those 2 or 3 locations. We go to the next slide. And jumping ahead 4 years, we just announced our 5th year of funding, and across the first 4 years of the program, we've now funded $6.1 million across 560 organizations, reaching 437 unique communities. And the total population of that adds up to 85 million people who reside in those communities as well. So we've been able to kind of take this small scale pilot for AARP and try to expand it and grow it. If we go to the next slide. So this kind of gives you a sense of the numbers, right? So I kind of mentioned the 6.1 million and 560. I think there's some other important things I want to touch on here, which is kind of the size of these grants. I mentioned that this started and evolved from an AARP state office micro grant program, but you see kind of on the screen there, the average grant is just around $10,000. And important to note that 2/3 of grants are under that $11,000 range. And we've seen so many great, fantastic projects in the $500, $700, $800 range. I think we kind of like to say if your idea is big, no amount is too small. So this doesn't really require kind of a 50,000 complete holistic plan. We really want to fund everything that kind of meets the spectrum of where communities are. The other thing I'll note is that just about over 60% of the grants have gone to local nonprofits. And about 40% have gone to local government. So it's open for 501c3, C4, C6 nonprofits, as well as local and regional government entities. Go to the next slide. And this gives you a sense of the projects and the types of categories that we've funded in the past. So no shock to the folks on the phone here, but public spaces and placemaking is an incredibly important part of this program. You'll see on the screen there, it's about 54% of the projects that we funded in the past. And it also tends to make up the kind of greatest percentage of the applications that we receive as well. But that said, about a third of the projects have also gone to transportation related elements. And there's a lot of integration between those 2 categories, obviously. So with those 2, I think that kind of makes up the bulk of the projects that we funded, but we also have kind of kept this open and wide over the years and want to be responsive to needs. So about 6% of the projects have gone to housing, which are kind of focused on doing demonstrations around ADUs that Danielle talked about earlier, or doing programming to help kind of inform people of options for house sharing or other new kind of innovative approaches. And the other 3 I'll highlight. The first is kind of other. I think we've kept this category broad and open. We want to fund things like family caregiving support, also help kind of jumpstart economic and entrepreneurial activities as well. And then civic engagement is a critical part of AARP's work on livable communities and a critical part to everything that you all do as well. I know folks who are listening today. So that's another category. And then the last thing I'll highlight is coronavirus response. So about 5% of the projects that we funded over the entire program have actually gone to coronavirus response. We were able to fund just about 26 projects last year that were focused on supporting communities, local organizations, local governments as they responded to the coronavirus pandemic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We can go to the next slide. So this kind of answers the question that we asked earlier. So this is really a grant program that supports all communities. This is not something that just goes to big, dense urban centers. We've really wanted to intentionally support any type of community, no matter where they're at. So 42% have gone to urban communities, 38%, I'm rounding it up to 40, which was the answer earlier, 38% have gone to rural communities and 20% have gone to suburban. So no matter your community type, you should not restrict yourself from funding. And I'll just flag too that these are not thresholds. We don't allocate a certain amount to a certain type of community. This is just how the grants have fallen out based on the quality of the projects and the quality of the applications that we've received. Go to the next slide. So this gives you a sense of kind of some of the tangible deliverables that we've seen implemented in communities nationwide over the first 3 years of the program. So 522 benches have been installed, 54 murals have been painted across the country, 124 transportation access and training kind of transportation training programs have been conducted as well. So you kind of see that on the screen. There's also a lot more information here available on our website. But I kind of for the next thing, I'd love to actually we want to show a video from the city of Boston, which really kind of underscores that 522 benches. You'll see kind of a live example of some of those benches that were actually installed by the city of Boston as they were actually implementing an age-friendly action item in their plan and addressing equity at the same time. So we have a short kind of 2-minute video to show that talks about that.
We are in Dorchester, which is a neighborhood of Boston here in Massachusetts. The Age-Friendly Bench project came out of a bench equity study. So the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics counted the numbers of benches that were installed throughout the city, and it turned out that certain areas of the city were very well served by benches and other areas of the city were not. So the very first priority for us was to make sure that all neighborhoods are well served. All neighborhoods have benches. All neighborhoods have the infrastructure that people need in order to fully participate in their communities.
It's just like being at home. You know, it's like a porch out front. It's like a chair in the back. You couldn't ask for anything more than this.
Our Age Strong Commission in Boston is committed to making sure that the seniors that live in our city have every opportunity that everyone else has in our city. We want to continue to break down barriers, we want to continue to end stereotypes, and we want to make sure seniors who built our city and made the city that it is today feel as comfortable here today as any time in their life.
People want to overwhelmingly age within their communities, stay in their own homes, and things such as benches make a huge difference to doing that.
We feel that outdoor spaces are important and that they should be inviting, welcoming, and provide opportunities for people to come out and enjoy the community.
It's a place where people can kind of pause and spend time.
Para mí, en mi caso, me permite cualquier servicio que yo preste a cualquier cliente del negocio, pues pueden estar en espera de sentarse afuera. Ha sido excelente.
I think this bench actually brings people to the neighborhood and then introduces them to a lot of the other restaurants and places that we have around here.
So it's convenient, it's pretty, and it's very nice for the community.
It reduces social isolation. But really allows for friendship, participation, enjoyment.
So that gives you a sense of some of the a real life picture of some of the graphics that you see on the screen. We'll show a few more videos of some really fantastic challenge projects as well later on. If we can go to the next slide. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier on is that we kind of, one of the goals and intentions of this program is to help jumpstart change. And of course, we want to kind of have an understanding of what they've led to. So we've kind of been able to just completed an assessment of the program and have been able to look back and understand now. And we know that 45% of grants that have been funded through the program have demonstrated that they help that grantee either leverage additional funds and support from the public sector, or in some cases attract additional philanthropic public support and funding. The other, I think, really important thing for AARP and others as well is that grants have been able to help overcome barriers in the community. So 81% have demonstrated that they helped advance change, including policy change, spurred replication within the community or spurred replication outside of the community. So something was happening in one place that was then replicated outside of that community. And the last is kind of engagement. I think we know the importance of community engagement and the importance of raising awareness of efforts and raising your ability to engage volunteers, recruit volunteers. So about 100% of grantees have kind of demonstrated that those outcomes have been achieved. Again, kind of awareness engagement as well. So we can go to the next slide. So this is some of the all-important criteria and project types, and there's a lot more information on aarp.org/community challenge to give you that. But again, just kind of a sense of the eligibility. So nonprofit organizations are eligible to apply, 501c3, C4, C6s, government entities, and others are considered on a case-by-case basis. The types of organizations that can't apply, unfortunately, we do not provide funding to for-profit businesses or to support a for-profit venture or for-profit entity. Obviously, there's a lot of interconnected tissue there on the community level, so we really kind of want to consider everything on a case-by-case basis. So if you have a question, go to the website and you can email our inbox there, and we'll work to get back to you. The other thing I want to highlight is the project types and the types of things that we fund. So you saw an example of some of the permanent physical improvements that AARP will fund in communities, like benches, like transit stops. We also will fund temporary demonstrations. I think that's been one of the types of projects that we've seen in the community that have really kind of led to results and helped jumpstart barriers. Things like temporary bike lanes, temporary crosswalks, just any sort of temporary demonstration that's going to lead to longer term change. And the other is new innovative programming or services. While the program typically does not fund kind of ongoing programmatic activities, for example, if you have a really great program and you have X dollars from the program, you can expand it to X. What we want to do is kind of fund tests and innovative expansions of programming and services. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to another video from the city of Charleston, South Carolina, to highlight a bit how the temporary demonstrations that they've done, as well as some permanent improvements, can kind of help jumpstart their change.
We're in Charleston, South Carolina at the intersection of the West Ashley Greenway and Mark Fields, one of 3 artistic crosswalk locations that we are working on through the weekend. And we had 2 different artists who developed the concepts for 3 crosswalks. And basically we just are trying to draw attention to these spaces, make it safer for people on bike and on foot as they're utilizing the greenway. When it reaches its full potential, it could be part of a very large bike ped network linking up the majority of West Ashley ultimately into downtown. And that's a very big deal for people who want to get out of their cars for recreation, but also for commuting and running errands.
It's just become a real community asset to have part of your city with a lineal park all the way through it.
We also want to make sure that the people who have been here can age in place. So all of these different members of the community, whether they're new, whether they've been here for a long time, they need access to things, and they need to be able to get access without driving. People need to feel safe when they're walking and biking, and so doing this in even small ways is going to get more people active and out of their cars.
I use it at least 3 to 4 times a week on my bicycle, getting to and from my part-time job. I also use the Greenway every day with my dog. I walk at least an hour a day on the Greenway with my dog, and I use my car generally twice a week.
It fits in with our livable communities and our safe street initiatives. As seniors age, it's important for them, if they don't drive and things, to get out and be able to walk and have some mobility. I know there are grocery stores right here in the area. There is a medical center right here. So it's important for people to be able to get out and do that. So we push sidewalks and intersections and traffic lights and safe crossings and things like that.
Thank goodness for the AARP grant money, because we were able to afford the paint, all of the supplies we've needed, paying artist stipends because we absolutely value creatives' time.
People need to feel, 1, that they're safe, and 2, that they're welcomed. And I feel like art and culture play a part in that. especially in a city like Charleston with its history.
If we can get people, giving them that choice, that freedom of mobility choice, doing it even with small things like upgrading these intersections, it makes a huge difference.
So I think that project was a really great example of kind of power of volunteerism in executing projects through the community challenge as well. While we will fund cities like Boston and like others, there are kind of smaller nonprofit neighborhood groups that also receive funding and execute projects, often in partnership with city and other local government entities as well. So we can go to the next slide. So I've kind of given you an overview of the community challenge. I want to highlight, some of you may be familiar or may have applied in the past. So I actually want to highlight a couple things that are different this year and new. The first thing that I want to underscore is a focus on diversity and inclusion. So AARP through the challenge has kind of emphasized this area broadly over the years. However, kind of in response to important social movements we're seeing, we are underscoring and bolstering our support for diversity and inclusion in the challenge this year. I've added a new category that's focused on inclusive efforts that support and engage diverse residents. And we're also kind of increasing our emphasis throughout the program and the scoring criteria as well to ensure that applicants are articulating how their effort is inclusive and how diverse voices will be engaged throughout the process. The other piece I'll underscore is COVID-19 obviously is still here with us, sadly, and we're, while we are all kind of seeing a speedier vaccination process and hoping for an even faster one and hoping to be on the tail end of this, we also know that it's going to be here for a while. So one of the things we want to fund with the program this year are COVID-19 recovery efforts. So last year we were really focused on response. We also want to fund projects this year that are focused on looking beyond COVID, making improvements that reflect COVID and are kind of integrated with that, but also focused on how we can build a community that's greater afterwards and kind of looking beyond COVID. So that's what's new. I think the next slide will talk a little bit about some key dates. So before we get into that, I'll just highlight again the categories that are accepted. So I highlighted diversity and inclusion, coronavirus recovery. The others are the ones that we walked through earlier: public spaces, transportation, housing, civic engagement in smart cities, and again, this category around other, which is going to be focused around broadband expansion, et cetera, other community needs. Go to the next slide. So these are the key dates, and I'll just flag that these are all available on our website, www.aarp.org/community-challenge. You can go there. All of this information's there. These dates are there as well. So the program is currently open and accepting applications until April 14th. That window closes at 8 p.m. Eastern time on April 14th. Just know if you're thinking about applying, I would go check out the materials, check out the application, and see what you need to figure out. The other is this program is really built around quick action, so we have a very fast timeline. The window closes on April 14th, and by June, applicants are notified of their status, either if they're selected or not selected. By July 14th, we hope to have MOUs executed, and the public announcement of the grants is toward the end of July. And importantly, I mentioned the kind of quick action timeline. Projects, in an ideal world, we want to see all projects completed by November 2021. However, we know that there's a reality in implementation, right? So you might need to get the permit from the local government, or due to COVID, delays in ordering parts, and we kind of commit to working with grantees to find timelines that work and are reasonable. But from the kind of start, our hope is that projects are completed within the calendar year, and then after action reports are done, before the holiday season, and then we kind of will look on to the next year. So those are the key dates and kind of a lot of the important information about the program. I've seen a lot of questions in the chat, including one comment that I saw popped up about the ukulele in the video. So we appreciate that. I'm glad. We'll be sure to share that back with our broadcast team that the music selection was appreciated. So before we get into any questions, we'll play one last video from a project in the city of Miami that, again, like Boston, was kind of a great example of advancing an age-friendly, an item that was identified in their age-friendly action plan, and engaged the community and placed benches in places that they were needed, identified by neighborhoods.
We are here in Miami-Dade County. We're in the city of Miami. We're actually in a neighborhood called Little Havana. As part of our initiatives, Live Healthy Little Havana and Age Friendly, we heard from these residents that they would like to see a better transit experience, which means shade for trees and also places to sit and rest while they're waiting for the bus.
Miami, I call it an 880 city. You know, we're a city that wants to go from the 8-year-old and a playground having a good time to the 80-year-old, making sure they can get across the sidewalk, making sure that they can live in peace and enjoyment.
Thanks to AARP's grant, the Community Challenge grant, we were able to install 12 benches around Little Havana in places where before they weren't able to be installed because there wasn't enough right of way.
Having a bench offers people the opportunity to come out and interact with, society, right? To be able to come outside, to be able to breathe fresh air. It's really about enhancing their quality of life. And it's a small gesture, but it's a major thing.
The benches that have been installed are actually slim benches. They're called semi-seats. They have a handle in the middle, so it'll be easier for older adults and other residents to be able to get up and sit down. They're also bright and colorful. They're green and orange, which are the city of Miami colors.
Many of our seniors do not have their own vehicles. They don't drive, so they depend on public transportation. And this is why it's so important to have these comfortable, wider benches. They could feel a little more at ease waiting for the bus.
Es bueno que se le dé un poquito más atención, sea por la alcaldía de la ciudad, por el condado, por la gobernación, por donde sea.
Benches are also a place to build community. So now you've kind of built a little tiny public space where people can sit down and rest and talk.
Hay muchas necesidades por parte de los residentes y una gran necesidad era esta, tener un espacio en donde ellos poder esperar su bus o su transporte. Eso les ha hecho a ellos muy felices.
Our administration wants to focus on quality of life and, quality of life at all walks of life, at all times in a person's life. When you get to be elderly, above 65, you really are focusing on what some would consider, or what they call in Spanish, la tercera edad, the third phase of your life. And so it's a phase that we want people to enjoy, and we want them to feel welcome in our city.
It's a small piece of a livable community, of a community that's great for all ages, that makes people feel like they want to be out and using the community and living healthy lives because they have the opportunity to do that.
Great. So that was another, I think, another example of a really impactful project executed by a local organization in support of broader efforts. So with that, I think the next slide will give us a sense of where you can go to learn more, which is www.aarp.org/community-challenge. If you go there, you'll be able to see about 30, 40 other videos like the ones you saw today, much more information on how to apply, examples of past projects, and kind of you can also look at the website Danielle shared earlier, the Livable Communities map, which also has all of the community challenge projects along with all of the communities that are part of the AARP network of age-friendly communities. So with that, we'll pause here and look forward to taking questions from folks.
Great, thank you so much to Danielle and Mike. We can stop sharing slides now and hop into this Q&A, and I will also join you all. Hello, everybody. So yeah, this has been great to hear from you both, extremely informative, and also just makes you think about everything that's going on in communities right now, and even how much has changed in the last year, I bet you're going to get a lot of exciting and inspiring applications. We have a lot of practical questions in the chat, and I know Danielle's been answering a lot of those, and Mike some as well. So I feel before we jump into anything a little more in depth, shall we tackle some of those just so everybody has the information they need? Okay, great. I know a couple times, can more than one project be considered? Came up.
Yep, an organization can put in as many applications as you like, so there's no limit on that.
Okay.
And there's no limit on a community either. So if this Metro Atlanta area has 14 organizations that submit, that's totally fine as well.
Excellent. And what is the minimum and max grant award? Came up a couple of times.
Yeah, we actually do not have a minimum and we do not have a maximum. What I'll say is kind of, if you look back at the some of the earlier in the presentation, the average grant is around $10,000 and 2/3 of grants are under $11,000. So, and I mentioned kind of earlier, also we funded projects in the $300, $400, $500, $700 range. And kind of, again, so there's, again, no max, but kind of in that range and beyond, I think is the area to be in.
Okay. Someone asked, we're not a 501c3. Can we use a fiscal sponsor?
Yep. There's a process to work through on that as you're applying, but yes, that is totally acceptable. And we funded several organizations in the past using that framework.
Okay. Moving on, regarding municipalities, would this be a one-off grant or possibilities for applying over multiple years?
There is definitely a possibility to apply over multiple years. As Danielle knows, we've funded several municipalities and organizations multiple times. The city itself maybe the city applied one year and another organization applied another year. So while we don't have a multi-year grant process, there is the possibility to apply for multiple grants in multiple years.
Okay, another that came up speaks to projects, and can they belong to more than one category?
Yes, they can. There's some overlap in terms of subcategories and categories, but they should be able to. And if you have actually two distinct projects too, that's totally fine to put in multiple applications.
Okay. There's plenty here, so I'll keep asking. Can a community improvement district quasi-governmental organization apply?
That's something I think we just need to sort through on the application process, but government entities beyond kind of the specific municipal government have applied and received funds in the past. So while I hesitate to kind of say yes right off the board, that seems like the type of organization that would fit for the program.
Okay, and I also received a question about, what happens to those that don't receive the grant? Do you ever consider any feedback based on what they could do differently to get funding in the future?
Yeah, I'll answer that real quick, and then I think Danielle was gonna jump in on a previous question, so I'll pivot to her. The feedback process, so in short, there's a couple ways that happens. If an organization is not funded, AARP will follow up and let you know. I will say that there's several great stories we have of organizations that, while they weren't funded through the official AARP Community Challenge program, other organizations, maybe they didn't get selected through that, but they were able to receive a grant through the state office. So AARP state offices are your key contacts on the ground. They're the ones doing all of this work, and they play a critical role in kind of reviewing applications throughout their state. So even if a project was not funded through the Community Challenge, state offices have worked with those grantees by funding their projects, or other ways, by bringing them into other work, finding other opportunities to partner together. And
yeah,
Danielle,
I was going to jump in on some of the questions. There have been quite a few questions around volunteers and the role of volunteers. I would say we are an organization that rests on a very strong foundation of volunteers. We are indebted to our thousands of volunteers around the country, and we really celebrate that. So we highly encourage you to have a strong volunteer element to your project, whether that's in the planning or the implementation. I'll say that there was a question about the rating criteria and how these are gauged. The state offices take the first whack at evaluating, and oftentimes they're enlisting their own volunteers and helping us evaluate project proposals. So we highly encourage you to incorporate volunteers in the design and the execution of your projects. And yes, we have funded a pickleball project.
There's actually a video on the website about that.
Finley, Ohio, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I also just some other practical points here because we're getting some repeat questions. After the webinar, we'll put the recording together and we'll make all of this available to you. So all attendees will receive an email with the links that have been shared today, as well as a recording, the PowerPoint that was shown. So you'll be able to follow up and kind of catch on anything that you missed. And some of the key questions here should be answered.
Seen a lot of pickleball fans.
A lot of pickleball fans.
Yeah.
I want to ask you both a couple of questions that dig a little deeper into these projects. Now that the grant program's been running for 4 years, how have you seen communities expand upon the work of their original projects? And I think this spoke to some questions that came up in the chat.
Yeah, Danielle, you want me to take that first?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So I think it kind of goes back to some of the ways that some of the outcomes and impacts that we've seen, right? So I kind of mentioned 45% of grantees have kind of used the grant to leverage additional funding. 81% have used it to overcome policy barriers. I'll highlight a few that I think are really impactful. So the city of Richardson, Texas, which is kind of in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, received roughly a $15,000 grant from us a few years ago to do a temporary bike lane, a temporary crosswalk connecting a transit station to a parking lot where, and kind of to the broader community there. And based on executing that grant, they were able to build support and build awareness to leverage that to get another grant from another foundation, much larger, to make some of those installations permanent. And then kind of down the road, they've now, by testing that concept and demonstrating it, have been working to secure capital improvement funds, kind of in the millions of dollars range, to basically kind of expand that area broader and move that bike lane further down the road. So that's one example. Another is kind of on the smaller and scrappier side. In Kansas City, Missouri, an organization, Better Block KC, received a $2,500 grant to do a very cool, very scrappy test of a temporary mobility lane that included e-scooters, bikes, walkers. And based on receiving that grant, they were able to kind of influence future changes that were happening down the road, influence the master planning, and actually get some mobility parking, scooter parking installed permanently in the area as well. So those are two examples. There's a lot of other, if you go to the website, there's several articles we've written up about some of these projects and others. Danielle, I don't know if you have any to add.
Well, I would just add that I think those are great examples. I think the other thing, and I think, you know, and particularly as we connect this to our age-friendly community work, which takes many years to execute, these grants can be a really important way of bringing that important work to light for people. I think it's obviously a very visible way to improve a community. I think it's a great way to sort of demonstrate the value of what we mean by creating a more age-friendly community. It's not just create something for the 55 plus senior living facility over there. That's not what we mean. We're really talking about how do we improve a community in ways that benefit everyone. Yeah. So for the age-friendly work, I would say you're going to see lots of communities here represented and age-friendly leaders in the chat. I think that they can indicate, or they would testify that it sometimes can be hard, I think, to bring these issues to life and make them feel relevant to people, but these challenge grants are a way to really do that in a way that's extremely inclusive. It's very exciting, and often it, to Mike's point, compels other work to follow. So there's a nice time there as well.
Excellent, and thanks, Danielle, for continuing to hop in the chat. I know there's a lot going on in there. Another question for you all: have you seen grantees connect with each other, even across states, to help support each other's continued work? Like, is there some kind of formal or informal grantee coalition, or any thoughts on that?
Well, we can give you a little snapshot of something to come, and then I'll let Mike speak to the grant. So back to our age-friendly community members. So again, we have over 500 communities that are in our age-friendly network now. 6 states, that number's growing all the time. We are just about to launch a members-only portal in which our age-friendly members will be able to talk to one another directly. They'll be able to sort of tag posts and tee up questions and create little message groups, like the whole bit. It's going to be, it's taking our whole network, frankly, to the next level. We know that there's a lot of overlap between our community challenge grants recipients and our age-friendly community. You need not be an age-friendly community to apply, but we have seen, and I think Mike's done some amazing research to show that this work has been particularly impactful in that community, and that can and will be a forum for exchange. But I'll let Mike jump in on other options as well.
Yeah, I think Danielle, you hit it kind of right on the head. And while we don't have kind of a formal network of past grantees to connect, it's all kind of available on the Livable Communities website on the map. You can see it there. And as Danielle said, there's connections for grantees through other areas of work as well. So.
Great. I know a couple of questions came up in chat. I don't know, Danielle, if you want to talk about it together, about the percentages of applications. I don't know if you want to say a couple things.
Well, I dropped into this chat that in 2020, we had 2,800 applications and awarded 184 grants. That was a bit of an extreme year because we did lengthen the window for applications. But I will say we are regularly subscribed by an order magnitude of 10 to 1, I would say is probably on average. There's also a question here about rural, and I know that we happen to have chosen videos today that do speak to rural places. We do have grants available from smaller towns as well. Saco, Maine is one. I mean, there are lots of smaller places that have received grants. I'm spacing on the one from Iowa where we have our musical park. I don't think that's a small town necessarily, but nevertheless, the point is that the state offices do weigh in on what their priorities are, where they like those funds to go. And they have lots of reasons for that. We know that some states are able to, really sort of broaden their reach through this grant program and want to diversify the places in which they have a presence through this grant program. So that might be some of their metrics and how they prioritize their grant awards. Conversely, they may seek to really shore up the work in their age-friendly communities and prioritize awards that way. So each state has some autonomy in how they rank their grants. It's yet another reason to get to know your AARP state office so that this isn't the first time they're hearing of you. But nevertheless, we certainly do fund rural projects, and I hope that comes through loud and clear, even though the videos we showed today were urban ones.
Great. Thank you. And just one more question on my end to kind of end on a inspirational note. The key goal of placemaking work is to build community capacity and stewardship while building up the place itself. How have you seen these grants grow local capacity and leadership within the communities?
Mike, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a great, and sorry, you were kind of cutting out there, Juliet.
Okay.
For me, but I think I heard how do these spur leadership and capacity building for, so I think there's a couple examples that Danielle's talked about already, right? Is places where the grant is integrated with kind of AARP state office or the age-friendly network. We've seen those really used to kind of move items forward, and that help engage volunteers, help build that awareness broadly, and that's been so important. And I think this also goes back to the rural point, right, where this is not just something for big towns and big cities. It's a small neighborhood group that has applied for a grant that's $500 to do an intergenerational garden bed project. So in Massachusetts, there was a grantee that did where they worked with the Boys and Girls Club and the Senior Center. They did an intergenerational garden bed project and forged those connections across generations. The grant itself was about $2,000, but the programming that evolved from that kind of has been ongoing. So there's examples like that I think we can kind of run through, but I know we're also limited for time. So Danielle, I'm not sure if you have anything else to add to that.
No.
I agree.
Okay. Excellent. Well, we're coming up on time, so I want to just thank you both again for joining us and sharing all this information with our audience. I can tell everyone's engaged and ready to get involved, and we look forward to hearing, what happens on the other side and what these grants end up being like and where they're taking place. So maybe we'll have to do a follow-up at some point, and I think that would be appreciated. And to all of you watching, again, in case you missed me say earlier, we will be sending everyone who registered, so even those who maybe registered and didn't attend, the recording, the slides, and a series of links that will direct you to everything that you need to find out about the challenge itself and about the program and anything else that we covered today. And we'll also do a little dig through the chat and make sure that there's nothing that kept coming up on repeat that maybe clearly you all need to know a bit more about. We'll highlight that in the email. And if you do have any other questions, please email us at info@pps.org. And we can always catch up with you quickly that way if that's easiest for you. So again, thank you to Danielle and Mike. You guys are amazing. Thanks for all that you're doing, and look forward to seeing you in person soon, and good luck with the applications.
Thanks so much for having us, Juliet.
Yes,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Juliet. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
See you, everybody.